was supposed to be just another normal night in New York. But something unexpected happened that changed everything. The night began like any other night in New York, but by sunrise, thousands of people would remember it for the rest of their lives. The city was loud, restless, and alive. Taxi horns echoed between the towering buildings, neon lights flickered on wet streets, and people hurried past each other without a second glance. But somewhere in the middle of that rushing crowd, something unexpected was about to happen. Something that would quietly remind the city that humanity still lived beneath the noise. Before we continue, take a quick moment. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of small actions to change lives, make sure to like this video, comment where you're watching from, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this. It was a cold autumn night when Daniel Carter stepped out of the subway station near Midtown Manhattan. Daniel was 32 years old, tall but slightly hunched as if life had slowly been pressing down on his shoulders for years. His dark jacket looked older than it should have been, and his tired eyes carried the weight of someone who had been fighting quiet battles for far too long. Just 6 months earlier, Daniel had been living a completely different life. He had a stable job as an assistant manager in a small electronics store, a tiny but cozy apartment in Queens, and a routine that, while ordinary, felt safe. But life has a strange way of changing directions when you least expect it. The store closed suddenly after the owner declared bankruptcy. Within weeks, Daniel lost his job, his savings began to disappear, and eventually even his apartment slipped away from him. New York, a city famous for opportunity, suddenly became a place that felt impossibly expensive and painfully lonely. For weeks, Daniel slept in different subway stations, sometimes in shelters when space was available. He avoided eye contact with strangers, ashamed of how quickly life had fallen apart. But that night, something felt different in the air. The cold wind pushed through the streets as Daniel walked slowly down 42nd Street. His hands were deep in his pockets, searching for warmth that the thin gloves couldn't provide. The bright billboards above him advertised luxury watches, expensive cars, and glamorous lives that felt like they belonged to another universe. Despite everything, Daniel had one habit he never abandoned. Every night, before finding somewhere to sleep, he walked for at least an hour through the city. It reminded him that he was still part of the world, even if he felt invisible. That was when he noticed the crowd. Up ahead, near a crosswalk glowing red under the traffic lights, people had gathered in a small circle. In New York, crowds usually meant street performers or some kind of spectacle. Curious, Daniel slowly moved closer, but what he saw stopped him completely. In the middle of the sidewalk sat an elderly man, slumped against a streetlight. His gray coat was thin and his breathing looked shallow. People had gathered around, but no one seemed to know what to do. Some people held their phones, unsure whether to call for help. Others simply stared, worried but frozen. For a moment, Daniel hesitated. He wasn't a doctor. He wasn't anyone important. He was just another struggling person trying to survive the night. But something inside him refused to let him walk away. Daniel pushed gently through the crowd and knelt beside the old man. The man's face was pale, and his hands trembled slightly from the cold. Without thinking twice, Daniel removed his own jacket and wrapped it around the stranger's shoulders. Someone in the crowd finally called an ambulance, but traffic in Midtown was heavy, and help would take time. Daniel stayed beside the man, speaking softly, keeping him awake, even though the old man could barely respond. The city noise continued around them, sirens in the distance, taxis rushing by, pedestrians moving along. But inside that small circle on the sidewalk, time seemed to slow down. Minutes passed. The cold grew sharper. Daniel rubbed the old man's hands gently to keep them warm. A few people from the crowd began to step forward, offering small help. One woman brought a bottle of water. Another person placed a scarf around the man's neck. Something remarkable was happening. The crowd that had first gathered out of curiosity slowly transformed into a group of strangers working together. For the first time in weeks, Daniel didn't feel invisible. Finally, after what felt like forever, the ambulance arrived. Paramedics rushed through the crowd and carefully lifted the elderly man onto a stretcher. Before they closed the ambulance doors, one of the paramedics turned toward Daniel. She asked if he was the one who had stayed with the man. Daniel nodded quietly. She gave him a small but sincere smile and said something that Daniel would never forget. She told him that his quick action and warmth may have saved the man's life. The ambulance drove away, its flashing lights disappearing into the busy streets of Manhattan. The crowd slowly began to disperse. People returned to their busy lives. But before leaving, several strangers came up to Daniel. Some thanked him. One man handed him a hot coffee. Another woman quietly slipped a $20 bill into his hand when she thought no one was looking. Daniel stood there, stunned, not because of the money or the coffee, but because for the first time in months, someone had looked at him with respect. That small moment on the sidewalk had changed something inside him. As Daniel continued walking through the city that night, something felt lighter in his chest. The same streets that once felt cold and uncaring now seemed slightly warmer. He didn't know it yet, but the story of what happened that night had already begun spreading. Several people in the crowd had recorded videos, not of drama or chaos, but of a stranger kneeling beside another stranger, refusing to leave him alone. By morning, the videos were circulating across social media. Millions of people watched them. News outlets called it a simple but powerful reminder of humanity in one of the world's busiest cities. They called Daniel the man who refused to walk away. But Daniel didn't see any of that. That night, he simply found a bench in a quiet corner of Central Park and finally fell asleep. The next morning, something unexpected happened. A woman named Maria, who had been in the crowd the night before, saw the video again online and recognized Daniel. She worked at a small nonprofit organization that helped people find housing and jobs after difficult life setbacks. Determined to find him, she returned to the same area of Midtown where everything had happened. After hours of searching, she finally spotted him sitting quietly outside a small cafe. Daniel looked confused when she approached him. But when she explained that she had seen what he did the night before, his face showed embarrassment more than pride. He told her anyone would have done the same thing. Maria gently smiled and told him something he didn't expect. She said not everyone would have stopped. That small conversation led to something Daniel never imagined. Maria offered to help him connect with her organization. Within days, Daniel had a temporary place to stay. Within weeks, he had interviews lined up. And within 2 months, Daniel had a new job, this time working at a community center that helped struggling families. The man who once felt invisible was now helping others stand back on their feet. But perhaps the most surprising moment came 3 months later. Daniel received a letter. Inside was a handwritten note from the elderly man he had helped that cold night. The man had recovered fully. He wrote that he had spent his entire life believing New York had become too busy for kindness. But that night had proven him wrong. He thanked Daniel not only for saving his life, but for reminding him that humanity still existed in the middle of the loudest city in the world. Before we reach the end of this story, we want to ask you something important. If this story has touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like the video, comment your thoughts below, and share it with someone who believes the world still needs kindness. And here's a special request before we finish. Comment the word kindness below if you believe one small act can change someone's entire life. Because sometimes the most unforgettable nights are not the ones filled with fame or celebration. Sometimes they are simply the nights when one person refuses to walk away. And that was the night no one in New York would ever forget.